I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
I'm not even supposed to be here today! Oh, fuck you!
Come on, you want me to drive? You're supposed to be suicidal. Remember, I'll
Anybody
drive.
a drive?
Get in the car.
Fuck me in the ass. Fuck you, you fucking stupid cunt.
Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and I'm here with a brand new movie review, and this movie review is going to be for 2006's other 9/11 film, United 93, and this one was directed by Paul Greengrass. So, what's the plot of United 93? Well, because of the title, this one is based off one of the hijacked flights, Flight 93, the one that was supposed to hit the Washington Capitol, but the passengers thwarted that attempt, and so it pretty much crashed to the ground instead. But on September 11th, 2001, we all know 2 American Airlines and 2 United Airlines and domestic U.S. flights were hijacked by the terrorists, and the collision of 2 planes went to the World Trade Center, one against the Pentagon, and another one went to the Pentagon. And the passengers of Crew United Flight 93 pretty much struggled against 4 terrorists that took back control of the Flight 93 airline, but sadly, we know how that tragedy went. And so, pretty much this was the first Hollywood feature to be a narrative of the September 11 attacks. The passengers were portrayed in the film by professional but unknown actors. Right there. And several participants in the real-life events portray themselves in the film, like Thomas Roberts, Tom Miller, Robin Sullivan, Tony Smith, James Fox, Shauna Fox, Jeremy Powell, and so on. And Slinny was initially involved in the film as an advisory role, then cast as small roles in air traffic controller, and then Paul Greengrass, the film's director, offered him the opportunity to play himself, and he accepted that. And he was the roles of one of the flight attendants. The 2 pilots and many other airlines personnel were filled by actual airline employees. And then during production, the actors playing the crew passengers of the flight had to be put in separate hotels from the actors portraying the hijackers and ate their meals separately, to create an air of antagonism in the film between the 2 groups. The set itself gets built so that it moved the way the actual flight did. During the filming, many of the actors actually got injured. The blood visible on their faces is actually authentic. And when they finished the very first take, like Jamie Harding, who played this A90, he became overwhelmed that he ended up sobbing during production. And filming took place from October to December 2005. And after the film was shot and advertised, United 93 would go into premiere at April 26, 2006 at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York City, and later it would open to North American theaters on April 28, 2006. And this movie got critical acclaim from people, and it's often regarded as one of the best films of 2006. It did make some fine money at the box office with $76 million worldwide, and 10% of the gross income from the opening weekend went to this donation to create a memorial of the flight's victims. And it got 2 Academy Award nominations as well, including Best Director for Paul Greengrass. Now, as for my reaction to the film, I like the movie, but honestly, it's not one I really like rewatching, not because it's a bad movie. It's not a bad movie. It's a good film, as it really does. It does well in accurately portraying the tragic events of Flight 93. I just don't like rewatching the film because it's very upsetting to watch, and I know how and knowing the real life tragedy it's based off of, I know how it ends before even watching the film. I'm one of the few minor that's personally prefers World Trade Center that came out the same year, because that film offers you hope, and I do like the chemistry between Nick Cage and Michael Pena in that film, especially in the scenes for when they're trapped under the rubble. And World Trade Center has a bit somewhat more hope. That's also based off a real tragedy, but World Trade Center offers you a bit of hope for the characters. It gives you like it's a bit more optimistic. This one though, like, you know how it goes, and there's like no optimism and there's no hope. There's times when the movie does feel like a more dramatized documentary. It has that made-for-TV feel to it. Like, not many great visual effects, not much action. There's not really supposed to be, though. Not too much interesting dialogue, and it gives you the illusion to the real-life events that are occurring. The camera's just kind of following the action. Like, and another thing, like, the camera's just kind of... There's times when the camera gets a little jumbled all over the place, and so it's kind of hard to really make out what's going on. And one of the most discussed things is, like, when this movie came out, some wondered if the movie was made too early. Like, how are you going to be able to capitalize on the grief of others and more on? But the nicest thing, though, is that the families at least did know about this movie, and most of them wanted a story their loved ones to be told. And I think Paul Greengrass kind of researched and got permission from them, and like right there, like this was around the time like people were like starting to kind of recover from 9/11. Like, some were still not over 9/11 around for a while. Like, even if it had been passed by then, like, some people were still not over it. Some lost family members from it. Rather, some almost died during it. So no one had really, like, the effects of 9/11, some of the effects are even still permanent to this day. And I like that this movie tries to be as real as possible, too. Like, United 93 does present, like, two stories, and it folds them seamlessly. The first bit concerns, like, the events aboard the flight itself. The second concerns the reactions of the flight controllers and military authorities on the ground. And the later characters that played in the movie were by actual people. And the film shows how all these people came to the realization of what was going to be happening in the morning. Right there. It's pretty much the lead motive. And the film does do well with some great craft, and it does respect the victims of the flights. And like most of the while, like, we pretty much get to see, like, you really can feel what happened on that aircraft in those like final moments before that aircraft crashed to pieces across the Pennsylvania countryside, which was originally supposed to go to the Capitol building. And Greengrass's version does definitely ring very true. It leaves the audience to be like the strength of determination of certain death, and like you get to know like the individuals in the story well, and you're drawn into their predicament, and you end up rooting for them to transcend history and survive a day. But even though you kind of also know they're not going to, and I do like that Paul Greengrass, like, I like that he didn't try to make us over-sympathize with the terrorists and all that, just try to over-humanize them. Right there, so that was also nice to see, but, so how does our movie start off? Well, because this is set on September 11, 2001, the film starts off very start of September 11, 2001, where you see our three hijackers on the plane. They're praying in their hotel room, and they're going for the Newark Liberty International Airport. Then we get to the airport, and the passengers and crew that board Flight 93 along with the hijackers as well. Then after everybody is boarded, Flight 93 runs into rush hour traffic, and the flight is momentarily delayed. But however, the other three soon to be hijacked flights that would hit the World Trade Centers, and then hit the World Trade Centers would though take off. Then though, Flight 93 does take off, and it passes by Manhattan. And then so, like, one of our hijackers, the Ajara, catches this glimpse of the World Trade Center before the plane goes airborne. And like knowing what's soon to be two planes are going to be hitting both those buildings. Then the air traffic controllers are monitoring all the current flights. They notice like American Airlines Flight 11 took the southern turn towards New York City. Then Flight 11 descends to lower Manhattan and crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. But air traffic controllers are not aware of it though. Then CNN broadcasts an international shot of the smoking World Trade Center before it collapses. Then the traffic controllers, unaware of Flight 11 crash, like, they pretty much trying to make sense of it. Then, of course, Flight 175 begins to descend. It goes towards New York City as well. Air traffic controllers realize that they're dealing with a hijacking. Then Flight 77 is hijacked as well. Then traffic controllers then alert the U.S. Air Force, and they are like deciding whether or not to shut down to shoot down any suspected hijacked flights. And the traffic controllers and Air Force, they're watching the horror, and Flight 175 crashes the south tower of the World Trade Center, and then that building also collapses. Right there. So, yeah, it does portray, like, it does kind of, like, does its best to portray kind of almost all the events that happened that day. In 1993, I feel like just would have been, I guess, a bit more powerful, like all the airborne scenes with aboard the doomed plane, like match like the clarity intensity on the ground control scenes, were the intense and best out of it. Definitely those were the best intense parts of the film. And director, like, one of the problems I have with Paul Greengrass, a lot of his films have too much shaky camera movements and blurry fast cut moments, and so it's hard to know what's really going on during some of his more intense moments. And that happens when the passengers finally start to revolt and try to take back the flight. And it just weakens it kind of weakens and defeats like some of the brilliant stuff of the film. And like when you see them huddle like whispering like when the two planes went to the World Trade Center, like it's not really a dramatic device to make the events tangible to the audience But what I do like about the movie is that at least it does you do get to see some portrayal of all the events of 9/11. But the main focus, though, it's about United 93, it's about Flight 93, United 93 flight. Is it pretty much takes you inside the flight, shows all the events that went on in that day from the passenger's perspective, and the 4 terrorists involved, like all the 40 people that were on the flight. It's a powerful, dramatic, and pretty respectable story for those who lost their lives in this flight. And the things that made this film work, like the no-name cast, like I like they don't have such big names for this movie because having an unknown cast actually did make the film feel more authentic and believable. And I like the director-writer Paul Greengrass actually did take the time to ask family members of the victims permission to do the film first before doing it. And when he got permission from the family members, the next thing he did was research on the whole subject. Like, some of the things, like, with films based on true events, is that they kind of go far-fetched, and they don't really feel true to the theatrical events that happen. But with United 93, Paul Greengrass actually took the time to do the research, get the family's permission to do the film. Right there. So I like that he went realistic and loyal to the events, and he portrayed them right. And then then after the World Trade Center news becomes well known, and when word of the planes that hit the World Trade Center then reach Flight 93, that's when our hijackers on Flight 93 decide to begin their hijacking. And so, they assemble this fake bomb out of clay and plastic. Then the other 3 wrestle their way into the cockpit, and they pretty much, once they are in the cockpit, they put a photo of the U.S. Capitol, which was their intended target that day, on the flight mounted clipboard. And then, of course, Flight 77 crashes, and a fireball at the Pentagon happens. By then, really, like, when it comes to the growing conversation of Ben Slaney and his people, like, there's coordination with the Air Force. It's like there's just not enough planes to be ready or armed to respond to all the hijackings, and so their only choice now is to kind of pretty much just shut down all airspace in the United States and ground every single flight from leaving. Until further notice. Because after the events of 9/11, like the U.S. flights did stay closed like for a very long time until further notice. The hijackers don't prevent the people from making phone calls through the airphone system. Then they hear about the crashes into the World Trade Center, the explosion of the Pentagon from loved ones. The passenger crew understand that if they're going to do nothing, that they will also die. So they decide to storm the cockpit and try to retake the plane. So before they do this, their passengers all pretty much go on to make one last set of phone calls to their friends and family, and they declare their intentions. And this was honestly this was such a heartbreaking scene to get through. Like, the finale is one of the most heartbreaking finales of all time, because even though you know how it's going to end, like, like you really still feel devastated, like witnessing this whole tragedy actually happen on screen. And like then the remaining crew then assemble what makeshift weapons they have, whether it's cutlery or wine balls and a fire extinguisher. Like from the early first few scenes, the film does have a suspenseful, haughty atmosphere to it. Like, because the director acknowledges that nothing could be done about the fate of the aircraft, the audience does know what's going to happen. And the film then moves along, and the trepidation increases to this new high when the aircraft taxis with its designated runway and prepares for the takeoff, and then you have the dread. You pretty much now know what's soon about to happen. And the moment, like, yeah, we're pretty much like, you pretty much now, like, it's like this is one of those things where some people wish they could go back and stop absurd past events from recurring, and this is definitely one of them. Some of it, honestly, like, I wish, like, if time travel did exist, I probably wish I could go back. I think I probably could go back and stop this day from happening. Like, I probably would do that. Like, so yeah, and the scenes from NORAD, the FAA, the air traffic controllers, tracking the eject planes, the way they're shot and they're acted, all that stuff is done admirably well. And they heighten the suspense and the feeling of helplessness and frustration that many people on the ground, like, were probably all feeling that day. Especially for some that probably like lost their flights that day when all the flights were getting shut down. Or being on one of those hijacked flights that crashed at either the Pentagon or the World Trade Center, or one of those passengers' perspective, or hell, being the Flight 93 passengers' perspective. And it definitely shows like the activities on boarding a plane and enforcing the reality, the associations that most people could experience on flights. And the 1993 scenes work so much because like Greengrass lets us get into like the characters. The phony home scenes are very touching. They show that people do care about others besides themselves. Very well acted moment, very well sad acted moments. There's no messages of hatred or anything. Like, yeah, those like final moments, like they're about making peace and are demonstrated greatly. And the film, like, we see the characters who learn and adapt to the situation. As far as character development goes, like seeing the characters go through hardships and developing the new person towards the end of the film, we don't see any of this. The characters don't change at all throughout the film. And they're not really supposed to go through you're not really supposed to get much big character development. Like, this film is just meant to portray one thing. The tragedy of Flight 93, the tragedy that happened to the passengers on it, and then pretty much preventing the hijackers from reaching the U.S. Capitol, which they were clearly going to crash the plane at. So now we get on to the finale right here. And well, this is kind of a bit of a predictable finale, but it's a finale that's, I will admit, does bring tears to my eyes every single time I do watch the film, like one time in a year. So when we learn that they find out one of the passengers is able to fly a plane, but he's not flown a commercial aircraft. So the group pin their hopes on being able to at least control the plane, and they debate whether or not the bomb is real or fake, before deciding to start their counterattack and overpower the terrorists with the bomb. So, the terrorist with the bomb, he gets overpowered and killed by the passengers with a fire extinguisher. And like one terrorist has seen this, the one in the fourth section sees this. He immediately warns the two in the cockpit and tries to hold off the passengers, and even using mace to try to hold them off, but even he gets overwhelmed and he gets killed by one of the passengers. So Zed Jara, he shakes the plane violently to try to throw the passengers off balance, but they make it into the cockpit. The passengers are wrestling for control. The plane goes into this nosedive towards the ground, and the score is very heartbreaking during this moment. It's like the crowd yelling just makes the scene even more heartbreaking during this moment. It's like when the plane begins its crash, like that's very well acted heartbreaking moment right there. And the movie ends like Flight 93, it crashes right into an empty field. And then blank. That's the end of the film. And before the credits roll, we do end with a text that says like there's no survivors. And that's true because nobody survived Flight 93. This all really happened that whole entire horrific day. Nobody survived Flight 93 at all, but these passengers made sure it did not get to the U.S. Capitol. So instead it crashed into an open field because the passengers immediately tried to take back the flight. And so they pretty much ended up saving the U.S. Capitol from getting destroyed, and why we still have it today. Because that's where this flight was going to go crash. While the other flight's targets were successful in destroying the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, this one though, they were able to avert this one from happening. And it sadly cost them all their lives and stuff. And so, yeah. That's the end of U-993. And like rewatching this just today, I sat there in just silence when the credits rolled. For a very long time. That's like, it's predictable ending, but it's one of those endings that still does stick with you. After you finish watching the film. But guys, the reason why I just like it and I don't really love it, it's like, I do have bad qualities with the film too. I don't like the camera work because the camera work gets all over the place a lot of times. It was kind of hard to make out or really see much of what was going on during some certain intense scenes. So I do wish the camera could have been held a little more straight. And as sad as the ending is, like, it is predictable because this is about Flight 93, and so there's going to be no survivors in the film. So everyone's going to die at the end. So yeah, like, the story is kind of predictable. In a way. And also because, well, it's not an easy watch. It's just a film you can only really watch like one time. Once a year. Other than those, I like U-993, but I don't love it. So in the end, I would only stream U-993 since while it is a good film, it's not really a rewatchable one, and it does have a bit of a predictable story. Anyways, guys, that's it for my review of U-993. If you want to how to rank U-993, here's how I'm going to rank this movie. So overall, if you want a film to remember the tragedy that happened to all the passengers on Flight 93 that horrific day, then I would definitely probably just stream U-993 because while it's good, it's definitely not an easy rewatch. If you're wondering how to rank U-993, I'm going to give U-993 a 7 out of 10. Alright, there we go, guys. That wraps up my review for U-993. Now I want to know in the comments down below, what do you think of What are your opinions on the film U-993? And until then, guys, that'll be it for this review. Thank you all for watching. And if you like this and want to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe to Don G. Corleone.